So good morning and welcome to the Latin American Economic Outlook 2023, organized by the Latin American Chamber of Commerce with the support of Scotiabank. Scotiabank is one of our members and is the leading bank in the Americas with a very strong on-ground presence in Canada and the US and across Latin America, focusing on the Pacific Alliance countries of Mexico, Chile, Peru, Colombia, and also Brazil. Through this unique Americas platform that combines global expertise with local presence and knowledge, Scotia offers clients a bridge to these key markets with investment flow, opportunities between the Americas and the world. Today, we have invited Eduardo Suarez Mogollón. He is the Vice President of the Latin American Macroeconomics Research at the Scotiabank. In his role, Eduardo leveraged the bank's experience in Latin America with a strong focus, as mentioned, in Mexico, Chile, Peru, and Colombia, providing direct support to the Pacific Alliance. Prior to this, Eduardo was the director and co-head of LATAM Strategy and Foreign Exchange Strategy team. Eduardo provides a very unique and comprehensive insight to the Latin American markets, product of his experience working in major Canadian and Mexican banks, and as well as the Mexican Finance Ministry, where he worked as the international economist, a department head in the Financial Programming Division, and as the Deputy Director of the Investors Relations Office. He has played a key role advising investors who want to reach the Latin American market, providing global companies with the guidance and insights on the best routes to make the most of their investments in the region. So thank you very much, Eduardo, for being once again with us on this yearly event of the Latin American Economic Outlook. So let us know what are we going to expect for 2023. Welcome.
Thank you very much for inviting me again to join you. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. I just wish it could be in person again. This year is going to be a little bit different than the past edition, in part because I think the drivers of Latin America are becoming very different from each other, and the main themes that we're looking at carefully in each of the countries is very different from when it was in the past. In the past, Latin America was often affected by similar shocks and going through similar dynamics, and I think the key issues in each country are now very differentiated. So I'll start quickly going over to how we're looking at the changes in the global stage, and then I'll focus on the Pacific Alliance countries, and I'll leave discussion of the rest of the region for any questions. So to start off, can you see the presentation there?
Yes, it's coming up. It's there.
Great, thank you. So some of the things that we're seeing. So there's a lot of discussion of the regionalization of the world, but I think the regionalization of the world is more of a deglobalization of the planet. This is particularly important for Mexico in the Latin American stage, but I think there's also implications for the rest of the region. So we went through a very aggressive period of global integration from 1970 up to the crisis in 2007. Interestingly, this actually very closely echoes to what happened 100 years ago in the 1870 to 1907 period, where we went through a massive global integration, where the emerging markets became a very large part of global capital markets. They became a very large part of global trade, and trade multiplied more than twofold in both counts of the share of GDP. During those periods, when the world was optimizing supply chains, when companies were cutting costs, and when competition was increasing across the planet, we saw that integration lead to a side effect, which was the drop in global inflation and the drop in global interest rates. We think that's now reversing. We're now clearly in a reversal of global integration, which is part of regionalization. Strangely, in that space, when the world is deglobalizing, for Mexico, trade is actually becoming a more important part of its GDP. However, it's also losing importance in global GDP. But I would say that for Mexico, the deglobalization is a threat, but it has the opportunity of tapping into the nearshoring story and the the regionalization of supply chain. So that could be a little bit of a mitigating factor. For the rest of Latin America, we think that the natural resources will make places like Chile, with its access to copper, regardless of what technology ends up winning out, copper will remain a key driver of power transmission. Peru, a similar story, and it has a broader commodity basket, and so forth. So Brazil, the importance of iron ore in some of the potential technologies for batteries will be very important. And that means that in this world that's deglobalizing, each of the countries in Latin America is now facing a different opportunity. In Mexico is the issue of nearshoring. We will later discuss whether they can fully take advantage of the situation. For the rest of Latin America, they can become part of a competition to secure natural resources, which presents the region with a very important opportunity. Going into the topic of this deglobalization, is now a fact that China had lost a massive share of U.S. imports. If you go back to the time when the conflict on the trade conflict between China and the US, around the time when President Trump took over in the US, to now, China has lost about 5 percentage points of market share in US imports. Mexico has captured a little bit of that, about 10%. The interesting fact is that places like Vietnam, Canada, Taiwan have actually fared much better in this supply chain recomposition. So for now, in the Mexican case, this is more of an opportunity than a realized gain in these U.S. markets. So the world is disintegrating, and we're supposed to be seeing a regionalization of supply chains, but places like, for example, Vietnam, Taiwan, India, have captured a lot of the market share gains that China has lost in U.S. imports. The other angle of this fragmentation is that we're seeing global inflation rise. This is leading to a very important divergence for the past 10 years. The past 10 years, the U.S. interest rates averaged around 1.7% on the 10-year segment. Now we're seeing a very aggressive increase in interest rates, more than double the previous level, and that presents a very important challenge for Latin America. I would say this shock is particularly difficult in Latin America for Brazil. Brazil has a very large share of its of GDP in public debt, 90% according to IMF estimates, and this increase in U.S. interest rates is going to hurt Brazil from a beta with a larger than 1 beta, which means Brazil is going to have some challenges on public debt. And for the whole of Latin America, it's going to be an issue. I would say that the risk for the region is that interest rates may rise a little bit further. What markets are currently expecting from policy in the US, it's still materially lower than what the Fed itself says in its dot plots. So this is going to be a year when the region is challenged on the global scenario by rising interest rates. So we have a world that's deglobalizing, a world that is seeing an increase in interest rates. But the region has some advantages that, besides what I mentioned earlier about the opportunities of commodities and the opportunities of the supply chain reintegration, that it has some pillars that help it support what's going on now. Sorry, I actually forgot to change that. This is actually the Pacific Alliance, not Mexico's pillars. There's 4 pillars that we like in the Pacific Alliance, and one of the reasons why the bank has focused on the Pacific Alliance. So the first one is the 4 countries in the Pacific Alliance have very strong autonomous central banks, which means they have credibility in fighting inflation, which reduces the vulnerability of the countries to increases in global interest rates. That's one of the things we like on the region. The second factor that we like of the Pacific Alliance, which is actually a Chilean innovation, is the pension fund system that the countries in the region have incorporated, in which you have a large domestic savings pool, which reduce the dependence of the countries in the PAC to foreign funding, and allow these countries to have a longer time to make the adjustment to higher interest rates. I would say this is particularly good in the Peruvian case, where you have a very large average life of the country's debt, and thus reduce vulnerability to an interest rate shock. Countries in general in the Pacific Alliance and much of Latin America with some exceptions, have fairly good fiscal situations, which means they can survive a world of high interest rates. This is particularly strong in Peru and Chile. And the other thing we like is trade agreements. Trade agreements, the PAC countries, ex-Colombia, although Colombia has been discussing joining it, are members of the CPTPP, a very advanced next generation trade agreement, which among other things includes investor dispute settlement, which is an important anchor for global investors. The other thing that the region has is youth. The Pacific Alliance countries, just because of demographics, are going to create a new economy larger than Colombia or Chile in the next 20 years. And that's just, if you assume zero income growth, just increasing the population that will go into working age means that it's a market that will continue to grow very aggressively. So in this very challenging environment, there's a few anchors that we see these countries having as a kind of a shared opportunity. And now I'll go into some of the country-specific issues, and I'll be very brief to leave some space for Q&A. In Mexico's case, so nearshoring, as I said earlier, in Mexico has so far been mostly an opportunity, not yet a realized one. If you look at, for example, investment, the Statistics Institute creates an index, volume of investment, where 2013 equals 100. The last print is just over 100. So investment in Mexico is currently at 2013 levels. So the nearshoring so far hasn't really resulted in an increase in investment. As I mentioned, well, I hinted at earlier, even though Mexico's exports or share of Mexico's economy were growing, Mexico's share of global export and Mexico's share of global GDP is also falling. Why is that? We think some of the challenges have to do with just the existence of production factors. In Mexico, spare capacity in power generation is currently very low. It's very basic at 1980 levels. And one of the key drivers of Mexico's industrial economy is power. 55% of the country's power is consumed by the manufacturing sector. So that's a big challenge. The second one is tax costs. Mexico has fairly large taxes on corporate profits. And if you adjust that for the economy being about 50% informal, it means that Mexico is not particularly competitive in tax cost and cost of borrowings, particularly as you move away from the more integrated global supply chains. Mexican triple B company basically borrows at the same cost as a US triple B company, but as you move further along, the difference in cost of capital start becoming more diverse. And the last one, sadly, is governance. The cost of insecurity in Mexico is relatively high. The Statistics Institute said about 2% of GDP is the cost of crime for the productive sector. However, that doesn't mean that nearshoring and is not happening. It just means that it's a much more nuanced story than most of the discussion around it suggests. We have sectors, manufacturing, logistics, which are doing really well. Sectors where FDI has been very robust, financial services have done well. Some states, particularly those in the north and the Bajío, have really benefited from a global investment, domestic investment, whereas sadly the countries in the south have missed out. And the investment from countries like Canada and the US has remained very robust, but it's very focalized in the sectors that have access to better productive factors. So this really is a story more of a regional dynamic, and those doing well, but investment overall remains challenged, and that's particularly because of the drag from the south. And this is very consistent. If you look at this growth for the past couple of decades, the north has been much more resilient, has outperformed dramatically, along with the Yucatan Peninsula, which is very related to tourism. The same is true on investment in power and telecoms, which again explains why that area is doing better in manufacturing because of access to better logistics, etc. And within that, there's also sectors. Financial services have been growing very aggressively. Manufacturing, utilities, communications, commerce have done well. So we think that nearshoring is to some degree discussed too simplistically in a lot of the media, rather than being an opportunity for the coal country. We think it's a story that's more smartly played by choosing the right sectors and the right regions. So this year for Mexico, we think it's going to be, as it has been to some degree in the last few years, a story where parts of the country and sectors in the country perform particularly well and some lag behind. However, there's some good news. The public finance situation is fairly strong. And public finance is not a big issue. And in the states where things do well, you do have very attractive dynamics, including Mexico's the seventh country in the world that produces the most engineers. And those engineers are increasing focusing in industries of future, renewables, technology, etc. So for people who play the story in the right way, we think Mexico's a very attractive market, and thankfully most investor returns are dictated by micro factors rather than macro. So we think Mexico's going to have a good year if you play the right sectors and the right regions. In Colombia, a lot of the story for last year in Colombia was about the challenges and the changes in policy. Colombia had never in its history had a government from the left that made the business sector in Colombia very nervous. But Colombia has shown us some interesting things over its time. It's the only country in Latin America that hasn't defaulted in the last 100 years. It's a country with very robust institutions that have survived very challenging things. And we perceive that this nervousness about the changing government, the arrival of President Petro, it's starting to settle down. We see Colombia slowing down, but having, say, a soft landing. The government is working within this institutional framework. The coalition, the government has to secure power, has moderate left and more radical left, but all balanced together, which means it's being pulled a little bit to the center, and the central bank has remained a very strong anchor of stability. So ultimately, we see Colombia as a country that is going to have a good year, particularly in this global challenging sector. We can clearly now see a slowdown in the economy. We're seeing a slowdown in the manufacturing sector. We're seeing a slowdown in retail sales, but we still expect a little bit of more of a flat line and a little bit of a soft landing, but an economy that will likely do materially better than was anticipated last year, with some challenges. The housing sales have fallen. We think that's also going to bottom soon. That is often a little bit of a lagging indicator. And with the confidence shock and the first time when Colombia actually had a questioning of its economic model, that likely explains part of the decline, but we think that's a little bit of a lagging indicator. It's going to pick up as the year progresses, and we're starting to see, for example, if you look at the performance of the real estate services starting to pick up, which is a little bit of a suggestion that we're going to see an improvement in that number, which was a little bit challenging. Investment is starting to pick up, which is again a very good signal that the private sector is starting to see, well, the arrival of Petro and the first left-leaning government in the country's history was really not the end of the world, just a change in focus. We are, to the point I mentioned about a slowdown, the consensus for the economy that it is going to slow down. Last year we had a very strong growth, close to 8%. This year we actually are on the optimistic side. We expect we're going to see the Colombian economy grow at about 1.5. Interestingly, the most negative of the forecast comes from MANREP, from the Colombian Central Bank. But then we expect an upswing as we move into 2024. But this year, we don't think it's going to be particularly bad, especially in a world where we have a lot of the large economies in the world sinking into recession. Colombia growing 1.5% actually shows a little bit of a resilience. In Chile, we think Chile is again regaining its status as the kind of the Swiss and the island of stability within the region. There was a lot of uncertainty around the rewrite of the constitution. We increasingly see that after the referendum of September last year, that the reform and the change in the rules of the game that rule the country is moderating. It's going to be less of a radical shift and more of a tweak. That tweak is likely to a large degree justify. Chile is now a middle-income country, a higher middle-income country, and so an increase in welfare benefits, social security is actually now more consistent with the level of income of the country. But the political establishment and political system in Chile show that it can manage something as complex as a rewrite of the constitution. The current government is expected to do a tax reform which will allow to finance that increase in welfare benefits in a sustainable way. So overall, we think that things in Chile are moving back in the right direction, and Chile will actually do fairly well. However, it's also likely that Chile is going to be one of the first countries in the Pacific Alliance, and likely in the world, that will start cutting rates, because Chile, differently from Colombia, we do expect a little bit of a hard landing this year. Chile's economy is going to have a worse recession. We actually expect a contraction of close to 2% in the Chilean economy. But inflation, along with that, is going to fall rapidly, so that will allow interest rates to provide some relief. But Chile will have a good year in the political front, a good year on the kind of the news headlines, but a tough year in the economy with a recession actually hitting it. In the interest of time, I'll move a little bit faster. As I showed before, inflation is falling rapidly. With that, the central bank rates are expected to fall, but thankfully, because of the country's robustness in the policy front, it's good qualifying situation. After a little bit of a deterioration in the credit ratings of the country, they are now stabilizing and doing much better. And we're starting to see a stabilization of business confidence as well. With the uncertainty of the constitutional process now behind us, confidence in Chile is now stabilizing and even starting to improve. So we think that after this year, where the country will face a recession, partly driven by aggressive increases in interest rates, Chile will actually have a fairly good 2024. In Peru, I tend to think of Peru a little bit of how people discuss Italy, a country that has a very interesting, and not necessarily in a good way, headline evolution in politics, the changing governments, the political instability in Peru in the past few years has been very, very strong. Thankfully, the economy is starting to learn to live with that. Italy for a long time had a very unstable political environment, but the business community at some point just said, okay, we have to move on, and they start to operate regardless of what happens in politics. The political situation in Peru grabs a lot of headlines, but we actually are starting to see a strong resilience in the economic the performance of the country, despite all the headlines and the problems that we see in the political front in Peru. It's actually going to be one of the countries in the region that grows the fastest. It's actually going to be one of the countries in the world that grows the fastest, particularly in the western part of the world. We expect the economy to grow over 2% this year. Investment is going to be the lag, because we have a very uncertain political dynamic, but consumption is going to hold up, both on the public and the private sector. But very importantly, the private consumption is the one that's holding up better. The mining sector's production is starting to pick up, which is one of the key drivers there. The stimulus plan that the government is doing is going to give a little bit of a further boost to that. Consumer confidence is picking up from the very bad year you had in 2022. Business confidence is more shaken. The 12-month outlook is a little bit better than the short-term one. We still have some short-term uncertainty, but overall things are looking better. Even the power demand is starting to show an upswing. We can tell the chart on the left here is showing the comparison of a month-by-month evolution in power consumption, and we can tell that demand for power is picking up very strong, which suggests the Peruvian economy is actually not going to have a bad year. The more power is being demanded, the stronger economic activity tends to be. Retail sales are also starting to look up. So overall, despite the political uncertainty on the economic front, Peru is doing well. home sales in Lima, again, one of the lagging indicators, as I mentioned, in Colombia, vehicle sales have been among the weaker parts, but overall, copper output is starting to do better. Some new mines are being brought into online into production. The agro-industrial exports of Peru should continue to do well. This is going to be particularly important in this year when we now have some regions in the world facing food shortages. Peru is a very large agro industry exporter, but overall we see a gradual increase in the economic situation in Peru, and with that we have a little bit of compensation to the bad news and the uncertainty we are seeing on the political front. So overall, differently from the discussions we often have of Latin America, where the whole region tends to have similar topics playing out, we think this year is different. This year is going to be a year when we do have global factors playing out, rising global interest rates, slow disintegration of global supply chains. But the way that affects Latin America and the key issues in each of the countries in Latin America, it's going to be very, very different. In Mexico, we think it's going to be that tug between the good stories and the bad stories in nearshoring. Some sectors and some regions doing well, others doing not very well. In Colombia, we have the adjustment to the changing government, but an economy that, despite the uncertainty and despite the shock to private sector confidence, we're starting to see an improvement in the conditions, and we have a kind of a soft landing. In Chile, a little bit of an opposite of Colombia. We have the uncertainty on the political front now behind us, but the economy being the one that doesn't play very well. Chile actually falling into a recession this year, but the political stories and the long-term stories for Chile are actually becoming quite strong. And Peru, and a very different story. The political story remains very uncertain and very complicated, but the economy kind of learning to operate despite what happens in politics. So this is a continent that increasingly looks like it's a lot of different parts from each other. And with that, I will stop because I think in the interest of time, I'm only leaving 12 minutes for Q&A. So thank you very much. I'll stop the presentation here.
Thank you very much. And I would like to know if there's any questions, so please type them in the Q&A. We don't have any questions for now, not on the chat either. So we cover very much Pacific Alliance. Do you have anything about Brazil?
Yes, if there's no questions, I'll go into Brazil, because as a bank, our main focus is often the Pacific Alliance, but I'll speak a little bit about Brazil, which I hadn't done before. So Brazil is going through I would say a large soul searching, and it reminds me a lot of what I saw at the beginning of my career. When I was in the finance ministry, I remember that Lula had just come into power. There's a lot of concerns about how radical he could be. And investors were very nervous for the first few months, and eventually we learned that Lula was actually fairly pragmatic, and that the Brazilian institutions, particularly the political institutions, are very strong. And we're starting to see some of that emerge. The first month of the Lula administration, we saw a lot of clashes between the governor of central bank and the presidency. We're starting to see that they're learning to work together and coexist. So the kind of the pragmatic Lula emerging. The fiscal discussions have also been pulled to the center. The government is talking more about improvements in the tax structure rather than increasing taxes to companies, etc. So it sounds like Lula, like he was in the first time around, he faced a lot of challenges from the promises he made in the campaign, which sounded less business friendly, now starting to be pulled back to the center, which is consistent with what we saw from Lula in his first government. I think that's part of what explains why Brazilian assets are performing fairly well this year. A lot of the global investors who remember this Lula 1.0 in a similar manner to the way I lived through it, are starting to see that indeed Lula has retained a lot of the pragmatism that he used in the first term. So I think Brazil is going to be a story. From a market perspective, I actually expect a very strong market, but we do have a very important challenge in Brazil. Brazil probably has the most complicated fiscal situation in the region outside of the countries that already have very serious credit rating challenges, such as Argentina, Venezuela. But outside of those, Brazil probably has the hardest job on the fiscal front. With US interest rates going to 4%, and the pension situation, despite the reform performing the Temer administration, it's not unrealistic to anticipate that without a very aggressive fiscal reform, Brazil is going to be spending about 20% of GDP just on pensions and interest payments. So Lula is going to have his hands full with the fiscal situation. That's probably the most challenging element of Brazil in the next couple of years. But overall, we think the soundness of political institutions is proving that Brazil is a better story that some feared towards the close of last year. I'll also speak about something which I've noticed a lot speaking to global investors, pension funds, asset managers, and some of the large companies in the last few months, which is in a world moving towards economic blocks, access to a few of the key natural resources is going to be very important, both on the food and on the energy side. On the energy side, countries like Colombia and Brazil are very well positioned to take advantage of that. On Peru and Chile, we don't know which technology is going to end up winning, whether you have cars run on hydrogen, whether it'll be electric, whether it'll be gasoline, hybrids, etc. But any kind of energy that we use, particularly electricity, requires copper. And that means Chile and Peru are very well positioned from the dynamics of the world's supply chain. Colombia has very strong production of oil. Brazil and Colombia and Peru are very important producers of food. But one thing which will be challenging for the region, particularly for Brazil, could be fertilizers. So that's one of the sectors that we have to watch closely. But overall, each of the countries have very interesting opportunities in this world that is fragmenting and deglobalizing. And the other thing I've seen discussed a lot by global investors the last few days is geopolitics are increasingly being a key element. A lot of global investors were stuck like kids with their fingers in the cookie jar with some of the investment they had in Russia when we had the conflict between the Western powers and Russia and the sanctions, etc. So we think that global investors are increasingly thinking long-term about these dynamics. And from the discussions I've had with a lot of them, they consider Latin America to be a region where the risk of being stuck with the fingers in the cookie jar, like some global investors found in Russia, is a good opportunity. So Latin America, I would say, is a region that's been discussed in a fairly optimistic note by global investors, particularly the ones that have a very long-term perspective.
Thank you, Eduardo. We have another question. What are your insights on the current standoff between Peru and Mexico on the handing over of the Pacific Alliance Secretariat?
The Mexican government has shown it's very close to see some of the government in LATAM. We've had the clashes with the US, Canada on issues such as Venezuela. We have similar clashes on relationship with Cuba. We've had similar clashes with Peru. A few years ago, we had a similar situation with Bolivia. Sadly, I think this is one of the factors that can reduce the importance of the Pacific Alliance going forward. This divergence in ideas, and it can affect the dynamics and the functioning of some of these groups. I would say particularly the Pacific Alliance, because the Pacific Alliance had a very strong component of being led by the private sector, and politics kind of followed. on the deliverables that the private sectors of the countries have identified as key. And I anticipate that Chile will be a little bit of a moderate or an adult in the room on this front. Mexico and Peru will have a hard time finding a solution of this ideological clash. And sadly, that's not good news for the PAC. But no, not for the countries in the PAC, but for the organization of the PAC. At some point, I hope that the natural complementarities of these economies will end up bringing the group back into more harmonious functioning. But I think for now that's going to remain a challenge.
Thank you, Eduardo. That shows that how Pacific Alliance can start looking at the structure that ASEAN has with its own secretariat, rather than a joint and pass over secretariat. So the next question is, how do you see the situation and future of Mercosur as a bloc?
I think the biggest flaw in Mercosur is its rigidity. Having to have such countries that are so diverse from each other, having to come to approve and move together in issues such as trade is, I think, is unnecessary tying of the countries' hands. And many of the countries in Mercosur have very different structures in their openness and how close they are in their economic models. So I would prefer Mercosur to have a more flexible structure, such as TPP, what PAC was for a long time, and I hope it returns to being, if it managed to take the politics out of its functioning. But I ultimately see Mercosur as a very good idea at the outset, but an idea that has to be renovated. It would be interesting to see how the bloc would evolve if, for example, the members join CPTPP and we have the new trade agreements rewrite the rules of the old ones. But for me, Mercosur in its current form is a very rigid structure that has a lot of room for improvement. A lot of the countries in the bloc have very attractive characteristics, but I think the agreement itself has a lot of room for improvement.
Thank you, Eduardo. We are just on time to end this very interesting Outlook 2023 on Latin America. Thank you very much for your insights, and we will share the presentation and the recording session. Thank you very much, and have a good evening for you, and a good day for the rest of us.
Good night.
Thank you. Bye.
Have a good morning and rest of the day.